everybody, what's going on? It's Broken Nose Gaming here. So, I was doing some cleaning around the house and I came across a big box of computer stuff, dug inside of it, and actually came across something that I had done a few videos on in the past. That would be the Alienware Alpha R2. Now, if you remember, I've done 2 videos, I believe, on this, or maybe even 3. One was like a teardown and doing a little bit of servicing on it when I first got it. The second video, I think, was benchmarks. And then the third video was touching on it a year after I had gotten a hold of it. And I think I had talked about it maybe once or twice after that, maybe about what it was just doing generally. It has become a kind of backup computer at this point. And so I thought, you know what, now that I have new benchmarks that I'm using, basically the 3D Mark stuff instead of just the free stuff, I thought maybe I should run this through and see what kind of results this thing would get. Now, I was going to compare it to either maybe my blue computer behind me or the pink computer that I built, but I don't think that would be a very fair fight. This is a 35-watt quad-core 8-thread CPU, 6th gen Intel, low power, and the graphics card is a 4GB GTX 960. The CPU is technically upgradable. You could go to like a 6700K. I saw some comments on my video when it came to that. Graphics card, unless you have an Alienware amplifier, you really can't do anything. So I was trying to find something that was more suitable to compare this to. Now, since the 2 PCs were probably going to be way above spec when it comes to comparing it to the Alienware, I decided that this guy right here would be an okay comparison piece. What is this? Well, this is my MSI gaming laptop that I had used from time to time, which has now also kind of been relegated to light duty work. It's, you know, basic web browsing consumption. It can handle gaming and it can handle content creation in a pinch. I can throw the specs up on the screen here really quick. I'll give you a short rundown though. This has a 45-watt 6-core 12-thread Intel 10500H inside of it, and it is paired with a mobile GTX 1650 at 4GB. It also has 16GB of RAM, though it is 2 8GB sticks and it's running at 2666 versus 2133 DDR4. But I thought this is probably the closest thing I'd have for when it comes to doing a comparison between the Alpha R2 and something comparable. So I went ahead and ran some benchmarks in 3D Mark. I did a total of 5. I did things as lightweight as Night Raid, which both systems should be able to handle, up to even the most difficult, which was Steel Nomad, the standard DirectX 12 version, which actually threw a warning on both systems saying that the resources that I had on the computers were not enough and it might crash. But it did not. Granted, the scores are absolutely terrible in Steel Nomad, but we will get to that. Let me go ahead and I'll throw the benchmarks up on the screen right now and we can kind of go over these. As you can see, the Alpha R2's GTX 960 still lags behind the mobile version of the GTX 1650. We'll start from the bottom and work our way up. So if we look at Night Raid, the R2 managed to score 18,634. Meanwhile, the MSI laptop managed to score 24,106. Firestrike is kind of a strange one because it actually performed pretty poorly on both systems, which I'm not surprised by. The R2 managed a score of 5979, whereas the MSI managed a score of 7452. Time Spy kind of continues. The R2 managed 2198. The MSI laptop managed 3156. And then we get into Steel Nomad Lite, and the difference is starting to shorten up a little bit as we go up the list here. The R2 managed 2028, and the MSI laptop managed 2783. And then finally, the most demanding of the set was Steel Nomad Standard. The R2 managed a whopping 250, but the MSI managed to almost double it at 421. Now, it's very interesting, at the last benchmark, Steel Nomad, the Alpha R2's GTX 960 was like at 1 or 2 frames per second. It was a slideshow. It was not good. I'm surprised it managed the benchmark. The MSI laptop, on the other hand, was also a slideshow, but it wasn't as bad of a slideshow. It was at about 5 to 4 frames per second. So the mobile GTX 1650 was able to at least kind of claw its way through the benchmark a little bit better than the GTX 960. I also did some gaming on both the R2 and the laptop. I did real light gaming because I knew that at 1080p the Alpha R2 was going to have some struggles. The first benchmark video I did was 720p, and then I touched on it a year later in 1080p, and the 1080p results were not that great. So for this session, I mainly just did things like World of Tanks Blitz, I did Star Wars The Old Republic, and the same thing happened. It was hooked up to a 60 Hz monitor, so the R2 had the same refresh rate as the laptop. They're both 60 Hz. And even in World of Tanks Blitz, I saw longer loading times, longer like sort of lags or dips in terms of processing the game compared to the laptop. At this point, I think the GTX 960 is starting to show its age. I think you're starting to see just the requirements are now starting to kind of ramp up, especially when it comes to 1080p and above gaming. I just don't think that this Alpha R2 is going to cut it when it comes to that, unless you really start messing with the quality settings or you game in 720p. So I'm going to hold on to the Alpha R2. It's just going to be relegated to real basic stuff at this point. Content creation, maybe, but mainly productivity, office work, stuff like that. But even then, my MSI laptop can do everything that the Alienware can do, but better. So it might just become a museum piece at this point. The Alpha R2 has kind of had its time in the sun and is now being surpassed by laptops. If you're still looking at an Alpha R2 this late in time, the only thing I could see it really being useful for is maybe like retro gaming, or I used it for a period of time to run Stepmania and stream my Stepmania onto Twitch for a while. It was capable of doing that. Stepmania is not a very heavy game. It's a Dance Dance Revolution clone, and it was able to handle the input from the dance pad, displaying the game, and also streaming the game out because it had built-in Wi-Fi, so I could hook up to the internet. And it was also able to handle a separate camera, so I had the game, I had a camera of me playing, and I was streaming it. So it was able to do that. It might be good for like a DDR clone unit if you need something that's small and out of the way. These Alpha R2s would be useful for that. I'm starting to run out of ideas stuff for what to use the Alpha R2 for. Just because my laptop kind of does everything better. I probably really won't talk about this thing anymore. It's probably going to become a museum piece for me, or if I ever rebuild another Dance Dance Revolution machine, this will be the core, because I believe it'll be able to handle Stepmania for a very long time going forward. The GTX 960 would be able to handle that at 1080p, no problem. So that's all I really got to say about the Alpha R2. It's been a good unit. It's done, everything I really wanted it to do. It has filled a niche for me. Would I recommend it today? Probably not. There are better things to get than the Alpha R2 at this point. It will still have its purposes, but the purposes are becoming more and more limited than what they were in previous years, as with all technology does. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and until I see you in the next video, take it easy. Bye-bye.